Well, many thanks to Kayla, many thanks to Dr. Kenny for the presentation. Thank you for coming here right now. As I was saying before, I hope this is not just because of the free food. First warning, my English is still a bit rusty, so please be patient with me. And if you don't get something, feel free to raise your hand and ask, okay? Well, the presentation of today is actually a part, just a phase of my broader research. It was the research that Dr. Kenny was talking about before. And today I'm going to talk about a very little known or very little studied topic in Bolivian history. I'm talking about the García Meza dictatorship, okay? Okay. Yes. This is an overview of the García Meza regime in Bolivia. You ever heard about the García Meza dictatorship here? Someone? Somebody? No? Elizabeth, you are not. Okay. This regime was the last Bolivian dictatorship before the beginning on democratic transition in Bolivia. It was a very short period because it started in July 17 of 1980 and it ended in August 4 of 1981. This regime was supported by drug traffickers, the Santana cartel, aka La Corporación, led by Roberto Suarez Gomez. Just a little, I have to say that I will use the expression cartel, talking about Santana cartel, just for convenience, because it was a simple criminal organization. Okay, there was not many phases. There was not more than one organization that were involved in this. It was just one strong organization, and it also saw the involvement of foreign mercenaries, mostly neo-fascists and terrorists escaped from Europe. Why? Many times it is an understudied topic. Because actually it has many characteristics that make it different from the larger panorama of the military dictatorships in Latin America during the 70s and the 80s. Why? Because it was a short-lived regime. As I told you, lasted barely a year and making it usually brief, no, compared to the other Latin American regime. If we, for example, we think about the Pinochet regime, no, since 1973 to 1981, 1990. A Stroessner regime, even longer, since 1954 until still 1989. Was outlier in timing because it emerged when the most of the military regimes in the region were already consolidating. Again, let's see, Chilean dictatorship, Argentinian dictatorship, Brazilian, Paraguay, Uruguay, etc. And this regime involved unconventional actors because organized crime and foreign terrorists had never taken part in coup d'etat, in golpes de Estado in Latin America. And this was the only Latin American dictatorship born under the Carter administration. Although, you know, the friction that characterized the relation between the Carter administration and the other Latin American regimes in the 70s, because as we know, Carter administration put the human rights at the top of his foreign policy agenda. So the research questions that are that we found the starting point of this presentation are: was the García Meza's dictatorship truly an exception, or it is possible to find another way to interpret it? How to explain drug trafficking and foreign and mercenaries involvement, and how does the Bolivian case fit into the broader Cold War? Before going inside topic, it is necessary to see what was going on in the Americas in the late 70s. Starting from South America, as I mentioned before, the most of the region was under the control of brutal anti-communist military dictatorship. There was all this dictatorship was based on the national security doctrine. No? The national security doctrine was this Cold War military strategy that considered any kind of progressivism as the main threat to internal and hemispherical security. And the military, according to this theory, identified any kind of progressivism as units, they consider any leftist actors like parties, social movement, and trade unions as a puppet of the Soviet Union. This theory so legitimated state terrorism, legitimating the establishment of military dictatorship, and the end of democracy, basically. Based on this dictatorship, the Operation Condor was established in 1975 as we know. While in South America, in the southern corner, the situation was under control, in Central America there was a big crisis from the Cold War point, because there was the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua, the civil war in El Salvador, in Guatemala, etc. While again in North America, Jimmy Carter's human rights policy involved cutting economic and military regimes, and the release of US pressure on the region. Okay. In the meantime, Bolivia during the 70s also experienced different phases. In 1971, Hugo Banzer overthrew Juan José Torres' government and became dictator of Bolivia, adopting the national security doctrine. Basically, he implemented state terrorism, and he took part to the Operation Condor in 1975. After this fall, Bolivia experienced 2 years of extreme instability. There were violent protests organized by the Central Obrera Boliviana, the major Bolivian trade union, against the austerity measures imposed by the IMF. Between 1978 and 1979, there were several coup d'etat attempts. There was also a 2 weeks dictatorship by Alberto Natush Bush until November 1979, when Lydia Gayler was appointed ad interim president, calling the election for the next year, for June 1980. In the meantime, there's something very dangerous happened, because all the left-wing parties and movement and trade unions buried the hatchet, correct the expression, and decided to unify their efforts, creating a very big coalition, Unión Democrática y Popular, UEDP. As early in 1979, so a group of military led by General García Meza Tejada, alarmed by the rise of the left, began to explore the possibility to organize a golpe, a new coup d'etat, to bring back Bolivia within national security doctrine sphere of influence. But there were two problems. The first one, lack of funds. They had no money. And the other problem was the García Meza contingent had not enough men to organize, to successfully organize a golpe, a coup d'etat, and to run a regime in the afterward. So García Meza found two powerful allies, the Argentinian dictatorship that in that time was still under the leadership of Jorge Videla in 1980, and again the Santa Ana cartel. Why the Santa Ana cartel took part in this effort? Well, this organization had its headquarters in the northern part of the country, in the department of Beni. This organization was led by Roberto Suarez Gomez, known as also the king of cocaine, and he offered its financial and logistic support. Okay? You remember, for example, the movie Scarface, the character of Roberto Sosa was inspired to Roberto Suarez Gomez. What was the payoff? The payoff was in exchange of the support to the golpe, the Santa Ana cartel would have received a direct involvement in the future junta after the golpe. And they would have had access to the state infrastructure for the production and the trafficking of cocaine. Okay. So we said why, we explained the involvement of Santa Ana cartel and why Argentina also was so interested in taking part in this effort. Because as I said before, United States and Jimmy Carter released the pressure of on the region. So basically, Argentina aimed to fill the void left by the United States to the head of the anti-communist crusade in Latin America. Okay. And a key part of this strategy was to support the anti-communist guerrilla campaign in Central America. So organize and finance the counter-guerrilla against supporting the Contras and counter all the other guerrilla organization in Central America. But again, it needed funding to finance these activities because, as we saw, the United States stopped hiding them. So they decided to support García Meza, the effort, in exchange for a share of the cocaine trafficking profits. In 1979, so Argentina sent to Bolivia a unit of agents from the Batallón de Inteligencia 601. So in English, the Intelligence Battalion 601. Mainly composed of both European neo-fascist terrorists, particularly Italian and French. They, when the Italian European terrorists were hired by the Battalion de Inteligencia 601, they were already in the region because they escaped justice in Italy. Why? Let me open a parenthesis about the Italian members of the Battalion de Inteligencia 601. They were former members of neo-fascist terrorist organization who fled to Latin America to escape justice. In Italy, they carried out a series of terrorist attacks between 1979 and 1974. That was a period that in Italy is known as the strategy of tension. What was the goal of this wave of terrorist attacks? Their goal was to destabilize the country and create the condition for an authoritarian turn. The major attacks included the bombing at the Banca Nazionale dell'Agricoltura, the Agriculture Bank in Milan in 1979, the bombing of Milan's police headquarters in 1973, when there was an attempt to kill the Italian Prime Minister in 1973, Mariano Rumor. Basically, they dropped a bomb while the Prime Minister, Mariano Rumor, was giving a speech in the garden of the police headquarters in Milan, 1973. The explosion of the Italicus train, always they put a bomb in a train during a very important and very attended, it's the correct expression, train route, killing dozens of people again. And the last attempt, the bombing during a CGIL. CGIL is the most important trade union in Italy. Rally in Brescia in 1974. Always they put a bomb in a trash can in the middle of the place. The bomb exploded and 15 people died, basically. A lot of wounded people. This is closed. And in the 90s, Jorge Videla released a statement in which he said, we can't, sorry, I was wrong, we could not allow another Cuba to be created in Latin America. So this sentence represented also the political intention of Argentina supporting Bolivian coup d'etat in 1980, because there was a word that the winning of the UDP, the leftist coalition, could bring to the construction of another communist regime in Bolivia, even if there was no such intent in the program. I mean, there was the democratic election in 1980 in Bolivia. So, as I told before, the election were scheduled for June 29 in 1980. In the early 80s, a terror campaign started. On February 1980, a bomb exploded, this is in Bolivia, at the office of the Aquí weekly magazine. It's a quite famous magazine in Bolivia. On March 22, the magazine director, Luis Espinal, was kidnapped by the military and brutally tortured and assassinated. On June 2, 1980, a few days before the elections, an airplane carrying out the leaders of the Democratic and Popular Union coalition exploded after being sabotaged by the military before takeoff. And the only survivor of this attempt was Jaime Paz Zamora, and he is the father of the current of Rodrigo Paz that is running right now for the el balotaje, in October in Bolivia, after the first round of the elections. And the most severe attack was in June 27, and still 1980, when on the final day of the UDP electoral campaign, a bomb exploded into a crowd at the Paseo del Prado in La Paz. So here we can see many similarities between the Italian strategy of tension and what happened in Bolivia during just before the elections. And that's why also we can find same characters that organize this kind of strategy, because the same person that in Italy organized the strategy of tension were the same person that organized through the Battaglione Trejense 601 the campaign of terror before the election day in Bolivia. Sorry. July 1798. The coup, the top fire consumed. The UDP Union, the Democratic Popular, won the elections as expected. But to prevent the elected winner from assuming the power, Hernán Siles Barbato, the military seized control on July 17th without encountering any resistance. The new regime reinstated the tenets of the national security doctrine and immediately launched a campaign of repression, state terrorism, and forced disappearance. From the economical perspective, the García Meza regime adopted strongly neoliberal economic approach with large privatizations and opening the gates to foreign capitals. And a leader of the cartel, Luis Arce Gomez, that is the guy in the picture, was appointed as minister of, by the way, he was also the cousin of Roberto Suarez Gomez, the leader of the Santana cartel. Under the García Meza regime, the paramilitary squads composed of the cartel affiliates and European terrorists handled the repression of internal opposition. This picture was taken the day of the coup, and the same person you're seeing there basically used an ambulance to carry on an assault to the Central, the COB, the Union headquarters in La Paz. They kidnapped, tortured, and killed Marcelo Quiroga Santa Cruz, that was one of the most important trade unionists in Bolivia. There was also a particular squad named Los Novios de la Muerte, the fiancé of the death, that was led by Klaus Barbie. Klaus Barbie was a former Nazi leader, was also known as the Butcher of Lion, that managed to escape after the end of the World War II, and he arrived in Bolivia during the 60s, and he started to enter in the military spheres under the dictatorship of René Barrientos. There was also a document, a report by Italian secret services that reports that Pierluigi Pagliai, just remember the picture, this guy was Pierluigi Pagliai, and according to Italian secret services, this person was the main responsible of the human rights violation happened in Bolivia between 1980 and 1981. And okay, the same paramilitary squad that ran and managed the repression were the same squads that oversaw the coke plantation and the various phases of production. Okay? And also one of the main tasks was to eliminate all the small traffickers that were not aligned with the regime, because right now, basically, there was a true overlap between the structure of the cartel with the military regime. From another perspective, during the García Meza regime, the cocaine production increased exponentially, and the proceeds, it was a very important thing. I mean, the proceeds of the incomes of drug trafficking not only ends in the pocket of the traffickers, of course, but were also used to fund every aspect of the regime's operations and life. Basically, the salary of any public employee was paid through the income of the cocaine production, because in that period the cocaine production represented the 65–70% of the total income of the country. And until the election of Reagan, from another perspective, Argentina became the primary actor in Central America, providing support for counterinsurgency effort. By the way, Ariel Harmony, that was the former director of the UCIS here, he wrote a very important book exactly on this topic. By the way, it's one of the point of starting of my research when I was doing my PhD. And hundreds of people were arbitrarily arrested, tortured, killed, and disappeared in just 1 year. I mean, even it was very brief. That was even is considered more aggressive than the dictatorship of Hugo Banzer was. The fall of García Meza. The Bolivia exposure ex-narco state severely damaged the military reputation. By the way, I don't remember the name of the channel, but there was an American TV show that recorded a kind of documentary on the figure, on the character of Luis Arce Gomez, the Minister of Interior, and the name of the documentary was The Minister of the Cocaine. There was an interview here in Washington, D.C., in which the journalist tried to take some answers about all the allegations that were going on about Bolivia involvement in the drug trafficking, and he declined every responsibility. They say, no, we don't have nothing to do with the coca production. We fight to counter the coca production in Bolivia. But this, this is one of the most staged through which the Bolivian case was exposed in front of the eyes of the international community. I mean, this American show that realized this documentary. Also, a devastating economic and political crisis in Argentina led to the fall of Jorge Videla in March 1981. So, it also provoked the end of the Argentine support for the García Meza regime. And looking at the endogenous factor, there was also a part of the internal military that were concerned for their institutional reputation. So they organized another coup d'etat, another golpe to overthrow García Meza and started the democratic transition. The conclusions. So García Meza dictatorship should not be seen as an isolated anomaly, but as part of a broader Cold War dynamic. Its dependence on illicit revenues highlights the intersection of the state power, criminal economies, and non-state actors in Latin American Cold War. Because we see the involvement, the interaction between military, so a state actor, organized crime, and former militant, non-institutional actors. And also it represented an extreme and accelerated manifestation of authoritarian survival strategies by Argentina, echoing Argentina's attempt to block democratic transition in Bolivia and fostering transnational anti-communist cooperation in the American hemisphere, linking the southern cone with Central America. Bolivia also became, even if for a brief time, one of the clearest examples of hybrid anti-communist networks, where foreign terrorists and mercenaries reached the upper ranks of political repression. The regime also highlights how the Cold War in Latin America was not only a bipolar confrontation, but also a laboratory of transnational violence, illicit economies, and authoritarian resilience. That's it. I finished my presentation. I forgot, just the sources, because it is very important. important. See all the information, all the data I put in this presentation came from the National Archives and Record Administration in College Park, especially from the record group 263, the Nazi War Disclosure Act, in which basically the CIA investigating on the escape of the former Nazis hierarchies, no? Found was able to find Klaus Barbie in Bolivia, and I mean they opened a world, a very big a Pandora base, because they started to discover also the involvement also of other foreign person in the regime, García Meza regime. And by the way, this record group is fully available on internet on the CIA reading room. Other documents are from the House of Memory of Brescia. This is a no-profit organization, and the House of Memory collects all the trial paper related to the strategy of tension in Italy. The Bolivian Truth Commission final report, and the Arancibia Clavel files. Arancibia Clavel was a Chilean secret agent that worked in the Chilean political police station in Buenos Aires. These documents are held in the archive of the Supreme Court of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and also there are I use some documents from the archive of terror of Asunción in Paraguay. Thank you for the attention. I hope the was very good. Anyway.
Vito, feel free to take questions and comments.
Given that the UDP was so popular that it was a foregone conclusion they were going to win, and in fact they did win, why did we not see any rebellion, any resistance, like calls for general strikes in the streets? And given that the military a year later decided they needed to get rid of the regime, why was that not a rebellion even among the lower class of the military when the coup happened?
It's a big question.
Maybe you don't have the answers, I know, but you have your speculation about that.
No, the problem that obviously I think that the stabilizing campaign that there was before the golpe, the coup d'etat in Bolivia, worked very well, because they eliminated any kind of opposition and also spread the fear inside the people. I think any labor people, and no matter what was their job, I think they spread the fear in civil people, also in military people. In that period, I mean, it doesn't matter if you were, again, a civilian or military. If you were an opponent, you were, just think about the person that was overthrown by Hugo Banzer was a military. Juan José Torres, for example, was a very progressive, but was still a military, okay? So I think it was just the fear of...
Such similarities to what's happening here now.
Yes, thank you so much. You made me live again all those days. And there is a nice answer to your question.
Okay.
The surprise factor.
Wondering about that, yeah.
Usually coup d'etats happen at night when everybody's sleeping, when it is night, dark.
Right.
This happened at 12 noon. I was there.
Okay.
It was awful. We were so unprepared. That explains why there was no resistance. 12 noon, who could imagine a coup d'etat of this scale? Yeah. Now, there's something so interesting that you said when you mentioned about the hybrid method of anti-communist action. And it's interesting to see that also there was a hybrid method of resistance. The resistance came from the university, because one of the things that this dictatorship did was to close universities, to attack culture. Mm-hmm. And that created, for the first time in the history of Bolivia, a coalition, a very organic, holistic coalition of academics, intellectuals, middle class. Middle class is always so coward, they never go to the streets, but in this case they did. And the indigenous movement. Mm. So that was a way of hybrid resistance. It did not produce any result at the time, but in time. This is the beginning of the indigenous movement, the social movements in Bolivia. I'm sorry, but I'm so involved. I did leave all those days.
You know the story
No,
better
you know
than I
better
do,
than
so.
I just suffered it.
Oh, you had a question, yeah?
Sure, yeah, no, well, first of all, thank you for that fascinating presentation. I didn't realize that the Neo-Fascists had played such a prominent role in the García Meza regime, so that was really interesting.
Actually, it was the only case, sorry to interrupt you, the only case, I mean, they had more than one relations. They started to have a relation with the Chilean dictatorships. Then after the fall of the DINA and the replacement of the DINA with the CNA, they were basically kicked out from Chile because the new heads of the new secret service in Chile had no idea about that, who were that person. So they had to leave Chile to Argentina, and in that time they were hired by Argentine dictatorship. But if you consider the relation that they had with the Chilean dictatorship, they were just, how do you say, mano de obra. I mean, how do you say mano de obra?
Working.
No, yeah, I mean, just hands, people, they had any kind of influence on the regime. Right? I think this was, the Bolivian case was the only case in which they actually had a kind of responsibility and important roles in the repression.
So this leads to my question then, Vito. What was the Carter administration doing during this time? Like, I'm sure the CIA was aware of what was going on, where they were just looking the other way, or were they trying to exert any influence on what was happening? Do you have any sense of that?
Well, actually, this is one of the main questions of the research project I'm going to carry on in the next 3 years. But for what I could see right now, the Carter administration was very concerned about what was happening in Bolivia. Also, there was a very strict monitoring activity by CIA and by strict control, okay, by CIA and DA. So maybe it was the only time in which CIA and DA were actually agreed about something. But until now, I didn't find anything about concrete action in that moment. But maybe again, this is one of the main questions that I have. I hope to answer to through my research project.
Fascinating.
Done? So, our questions, okay?
Yeah, good, please keep, yep.
What would you say was the primary motivation why these European terrorists were coming over to Bolivia to help?
Well, here there are, you know, I spent 3 years of my life trying to answering that. What dissertation, so I tried to concentrate the answer. Okay. There were two basic reasons. The first one was a political reason, because after the fall of the Mediterranean dictatorship, okay, and I'm talking about the Portuguese, Spanish, and Greek dictatorship, Latin America became the new institutional point of reference of radical anti-communism in Europe. Okay, not only because of a political reason, but also because of a practical reason. Okay, because until the time Spain was providing shelter, okay, was providing protection, money to all the terrorists that were escaping from Italy in that moment. Okay, but after the death of Francisco Franco in 1975, all the military regimes disappeared, okay? And with Francisco Franco died also the last institutional ally that they had in Europe. So they had two choices. They stayed in Europe and they got arrested or worse, or they flew to Latin America, even if the situation was not so easy, okay? Because in that period, that was a very complicated period also for the dictatorships, okay? Because there was a bigger conflict that were going on, what was going on between Chile and Argentina. So Chile and Argentina were at the border of the armed conflict, for example. So they needed protection, and is another element I would like to highlight that the neo-fascist ideology was very far from the national security doctrine. Okay? So when they went to Latin America, they had to face very deep contradictions. Okay, but again, in that time, there was another important element that was the desire to stay free. That's I hope to be. If I was not clear, please tell me. I will.
No, that's good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your talk. I was curious to know if you could say a little bit more about the sources. I was, really especially intrigued what you were saying about the state and the operation of the state and its finances coming largely from drug trafficking. And I was thinking, the trial of the García Meza regime in the 80s and early 90s, my understanding is that drug trafficking was not one of the charges that was brought against the regime, which leads me to, assume that such evidence was not gathered in the course of that trial. So I'm wondering sort of how have you sort of faced the challenge of trying to understand these sort of nuts and bolts aspects of the regime, and what sources you have your list of sources, but what sources have allowed you to best understand how it worked, and what kinds of challenges have you faced as you've tried to study?
This is a very, very good question as an historian. Look, I think I found very helpful the Nazi War Disclosure Act, because I told you there are dozens of documents reporting all what was happening and in very particular specific way. And obviously, again, the fact that data is written in a document, it doesn't mean that this is true, actually true, better than I do. But in this case, there was an impressive coincidence between what the CIA and the US records said and what the Italian intelligence documents said. I mean, there was no connection. There was something different in the address, for example, because, for example, the CIA wrote that Stefano Delle Chiaie, one of the other guy that was in the picture, had his office at the Hotel Sheraton, for example, and in another document they say that he used to have his office in another street, in another place, but coming to the essence, to the even the involvement in the repressive campaign, drug trafficking and repression, there was an impressive coincidence between, and also in the archive of terror. Okay? I mean, there was a kind of triangulation of the sources that in that specific period, no, I was basically lucky. And there was also a coincidence with the report of the Bolivian Truth Commission. Okay? Also, you could find some little discrepancies, but never in the substance of the story.
Yes, thank you so much for this talk. I want to add a few points or questions or comments or possibilities for research that you would get into. And there are three. One is red sandwich, the other is the Carter administration, and the third is cocaine trafficking. I assume that most of the people in the room know the red sandwich comment from Richard Nixon. Now, justifying the coup against Allende, he said, well, if you have a communist regime in Cuba and a communist regime, you have Latin America, the red sandwich. He didn't make this, that may have been a White House comment that they used, but that actually only came out in the David Frost interviews in the spring of 1977. So I don't know if that sort of colored sort of popular opinion about, the US cannot allow it, however, the Carter administration has been affected. It's just interesting, the timing of that comment might be something to work in. Secondly, in terms of timing in the Carter administration, when you look at the Garcia Meza, the planned coup and the elections and everything, that was a really dangerous time for the Carter administration. Late 79, 1980. The late 79, November 4th was the takeover of the embassy in Iran. And then December 25th, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So one wonders, and I don't know, maybe the sources will show this to some degree, that maybe the people in the Carter administration were less concerned about human rights at that point, and they might have gone back to the old SOB strategy. You know, he's an SOB, but he's our SOB. Just a possibility there. And then the third, in terms of cocaine trafficking, this might affect the trial. We know that in the 80s, cocaine traffickers, cocaine cartels were being used by the US to support the Contra, to finance the Contra regime, the Contra rebellion in Nicaragua against the Sandinistas. So this coup was fairly early there, but I wonder if some sort of proto use of that was going on at the time as early as 1980 or 81. Certainly when the Reagan people took over, they were sort of happy to turn the other way on that. I wonder if that might have something to do with why that didn't come up during the trial, that they didn't want, I mean, this could have been really embarrassing to the US at that point in the Bolivian trial. So that just a thought, just some thoughts.
Very good question. I mean, regarding the sandwich, actually, I treated the US involvement as a side topic. You know, I mean, I was most interested in the endogenous factors, because many times you can find that, especially in our field, many times I think that US role are overestimated in general. So in order to, I prefer to look into the local responsibility and so local accountability. So that's why I left the US involvement aside. So, but there are obviously very, very important reflections. And about the second topic, again, I don't know. I mean, I hope to find all these questions, because also I will see in January, I will see the paper of the trial against Luis Arce Gomez that was celebrated here in the US, in Miami, for example. So maybe, since I think the court of Miami, I guess that was very interested also in every part, in every connection with the United States, it's possible that I will find something about also this part of the story. But thank you, seriously. More questions?
I was hearing all your, it was really great. I just also remember I'm from Peru, and we have like a period of also with a dictator, Alberto Fujimori, and was not short time, was like 10 years. And also US didn't do a lot of about it, about all the human rights that were there were a lot of violations of these human rights, a lot of sterilization, a lot of people that were killed, even though they are innocent, unarmed, just with the excuse that there were a lot of guerrillas among inside the country. They also use the excuses of fear that there are a lot of enemies inside the country to perpetuate their power. Also establish some neoliberalism policies, economies. So I think the fear is something that is that replies in with many dictators, right? I don't know if the US really is a great factor, because there was 10 years of that the people of Peru suffer this kind of violence. So I think there are other factors that counts more when this kind of violation happens.
sure, but I can say that the fact that dictatorship way in America ended at the middle of the 80s, it doesn't mean that the culture, no, the political culture also, and the all the practical lessons that the military gained during that period had changed during the years. I mean, I think that their kind of that kind of knowledge persisted in the culture of the Latin America's armies, also after the end of the dictatorships, no? Because in Peru, you not only had Fujimori, but you also have Jose Alvarado, for example. You have many dictatorships that was also allied with the national security doctrine. So I'm pretty sure that, again, the culture and the same tools that they used, no? That kind of tools cannot be used only to combat, for example, guerrilla, or in general, there are tools, for example, the counterinsurgency, okay? It was something that was elaborated to counter guerrillas in Indochina, for example, in Vietnam, in Cuba, but it still also is still used, for example, to combat guerrilla in the Middle East, for example. That's what I mean. I mean that the notion, the practical lesson that you learn, okay, they could be used also in other contexts, even if the Cold War is finished, even if the international stage panorama has changed, so that it doesn't make sense what you're saying.
I think there are like a particular interests that at the end comes more than the philosophical or economic philosophy. I think they are look for their own interests at the end. It's not about that you want to establish neoliberalism or you are against communism. It's just excuse.
You don't know that. That's right. I think that the human behavior is the result of many elements that contribute to create the action. So, could be also. Any other questions?
I think we have just hit time too, so thank you everybody for coming.